Ready for a trip back to the 70s?
Welcome back. We're at part 3 of our little 1970s retrospective. Hope you're enjoying so far. 1977, it was the year that the world went Star Wars crazy, mourned the death of a king, and opened an Atari 2600 at Christmas for the very first time. It was a roller coaster year. Kids and adults alike went nuts when Star Wars came out. I was in grade 4 at the time, and it became a bit of a competition at school over who could see it the most on its initial release. I think one of my classmates went 8 times, and that was back when it cost about $1.50 for your admission ticket. I only saw it once, but I splurged my allowance later on when the C-3PO and R2-D2 action figures came out. If you were into computers and video games and your parents were willing to shell out, you could do no better than 1977 because that was the year of the Apple II, the Commodore PET, the TRS-80, and the Atari 2600. Most of us didn't get a personal home computer until a few years later when the VIC-20 was released. Not much chance my parents were going to dish out around $1,300 for an Apple II when we had a perfectly good Coleco Telstar that we had just gotten about a year earlier, so had to make do with that for a while. Though I did eventually get my hands on a 2600, then I was in the cool club. The world also mourned the passing of Elvis Presley. Rock stars dying young in those days wasn't entirely a new thing, but for a moment the world held its collective breath in disbelief when the news came over the TV and radio. Fans lined Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis and turned his funeral into a bit of a circus, selling merchandise and partying and kind of ruining it for the ones who came to actually mourn and watch the king make that final trip home. If Elvis really did fake his death and saw this on TV, I can only guess what his reaction would be.
That'll be enough of that shit.
78 saw the Gibb family dominate the year-end charts, holding down 5 of the top 10. And if you wanted a hit song back in those days, put your balls in a vice, hit those high notes, and rake in the Grammys. But it also marked the tail end of the disco era, so thank God for that. One thing that rarely gets mentioned in the nostalgia videos I've watched, Mad magazine. It was like the golden age for them, and Alfred E. Newman was a hero to every gap-toothed wiseacre that dared to not worry in the face of catastrophe. I spouted his quotes, folded the back covers, never missed an issue, and copied Don Martin until I could get at least a lame impression of his drawing style down pat. I still have all my originals, and then some from long before I was ever hatched. The mid to late 70s was also the golden age of fast food, and it wasn't just the big companies. There were lots of regional burger joints whose popularity and presence might have been fleeting, but also managed to get in on this new way to feed a growing population who were increasingly on the go and in need of a quick and delicious meal. As much as fast food places claimed back then that their food was a healthy alternative for the family on the go and had commercials showing kids happily munching on their pre-made burgers, fries high in saturated fat, and washing them down with something that would likely contribute to the gastric irritation issues you'd experience later in life, these places were a staple of our childhood. Those idyllic summer days when school was out, it would be almost supper time, and just when you were sure you'd be called to the table to enjoy a pot of steaming pea soup with buns to sop 'em up with, your dad would announce, "Get your shoes on, kids, we're going to McDonald's for dinner." You were so excited you could hardly contain yourself and act like he had just announced a trip to Disneyland. And for the entire drive, you and your siblings would talk excitedly about what you were going to order. Now, I never got a chance to go to Disneyland in the 70s, but I'm pretty sure I'd react the same way if I got out of eating pea soup, regardless of what the meal replacement was. Kids don't get excited about much of anything these days unless you wag a new iPhone in front of their face or tickets to see Bad Bunny, but there was a time in what seemed like the ancient past when these places stood as the focal point of every small community, a second congregation after Sunday Mass, a gathering point for every little league team after a baseball game. You might unexpectedly run into another family while you were there and decide on a whim to eat together. The kids would sit at one table while the adults ate, then smoked at another, but those days are long gone, and all that's left are these old abandoned buildings where, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint sounds of the joyous laughter of the children from that bygone era. Thanks for watching my little 3-piece 70s meal. I'll release more topic-specific videos about that wood grain era in the future, and stay tuned for more decade trilogy work as I tackle the 80s and 90s. Please subscribe and hit that big bell for future updates. and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.